Ladies.
Yeah.
Watching myself.
Look, this is you here.
It's kind of late though.
Yeah, it's delayed by like a few seconds.
Like,
Okay, so
my hands not moving. Oh, see, now I'm going crazy. It's kind of late though. Oh, see, now I'm going crazy. It wasn't.
I know, but that's because I had it on the computer to like make sure it was working. So that's why. Yeah. So it was like playing through the HDMI.
That looked good. Give more of a direct view. What do you want? It's kind of hard. I mean, we're still there. It's like there's ghosts. Ghosts are there. Is that prime? Optimal conditions. Is that bus prime with more feet, more leg? A lot of leg. Okay. You want an apple?
For everyone to sleep after lunch. Yeah, can you?
We're not sure it was on. long as that's what Brian goes, he also. If it's not, I mean, I can.
No, me and Jess, so I haven't eaten.
How do I tell if it's charging?
This bar. Yep.
I remember so many fish.
Yeah.
Sushi swelling.
the whole time being yours. Your screen is so dirty.
No. Not my child. That's for you. Yes. Now, how are you? Good. How you doing?
Good.
Good morning.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good day.
Yep.
Excited. Good. I'm good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, do you remember where I was?
Yeah, Paul's gonna be here too. So
Awesome.
we were out fishing yesterday.
Oh.
Go over. Yeah. Good. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, 14 years. It was really crazy to do a few years ago. Went back to school. They actually trained to get a job done. That would be crazy. That's a movie.
Yeah, go ahead. Justin already asked me, so the seal's been broken.
You're saying I'm not original.
Yeah. I don't know. We don't know yet.
Is it live?
It is live.
We talked about
Yeah, you just whisper.
Did you see your email the last week? So probably not. I do have that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, my other video is just like catalog the roads that they decommissioned. There's issues that people see on the screen.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. As long as I know it's in the opera.
What's the, what do you get?
I'm looking at what the yeah. It was already done, and all of a sudden. There is no way. Yeah, and really. I think he wanted to. So I think I'm not sure exactly what's change their whole.
Yeah, well, let me know. And not Does it taste like purple?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I got a lot of hair. Yeah. This is going right now. Live stream. Live stream. I now just want to play
People don't like it. Yeah. Or also
He's right here.
Clean up?
Oh, those bookstores. Yeah. Tyler. Oh, the same thing.
Browns. You guys are pretty UP.
Oh, God, yeah, I guess so. What?
Hunter.
We're gonna do it after this.
Oh.
What the hell? Dude, I don't want to sit
Brown.
the live stream. Just right
What else?
Steven! I think you're alright. It's final time for Christmas. I don't know. 21st.
About an hour north of Football Lake. Football Lake. We're at Football Lake, Jamaica.
Oh, wait, Winnebago. They got the
I'm going to Milwaukee.
the lake sturgeon there.
Right away, yeah.
Snowbirds?
That must be someone remote.
They're recording.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh, we should talk that.
You're gonna go viral.
So this is a whole building outside.
Right, yeah, so it's
YouTube doesn't care.
Oh, yeah.
just put it on like the camera so it looks like.
All right, thank you all for coming. We're here today to see Hayley crush it. So I wanted to introduce her a little bit. Actually, before I introduce her, I want to thank her parents, Dan and Michelle, for coming all the way over to see the victory dance. And before I forget, win or lose, Badgers booze. So my house tonight, 415 West Center Street, 7. All right, in true Watts fashion, I'm gonna start with Matt. So Hayley, little Hayley, is from Pennsylvania originally, where she had some Big Ten love to start with, but eventually she moved over to Georgia, where she went to high school, her more formative years, where she, believe it or not, was homecoming queen. Although Georgia might be kind of backwoods, and I'm not so sure about this, given that her date was a scarecrow. But she ended up going and getting her undergrad degree at Georgia. And while she was there, or just after, she spent some time out in the Intermountain West and fell in love with it. And I was able to recruit her to join me here at Utah State, where she's been working on Bear Lake. Now, Hayley has really latched on to the Intermountain West lifestyle. She is a big fan of rock climbing or pillar climbing. She also has really tapped into the art of backpacking yoga, although she does need to work on some of her poses. Now, while she's here, for all my students, I really encourage them to kind of find their identity, not only as a scientist, but as a young adult. Oops, I went too far. I went out of order. Yes, athletes, funny little kid pictures. Do I really need to say anything? Look at that. So yeah, while she's here, I really wanted her to kind of tap into her boat identity. And the first round, she really was interested in this kind of Viking spirit, which I, of course, was all for. But then she really stepped it up a notch and decided that in actuality, she's kind of living that pirate lifestyle. And that's really who she is. And I was in support of this until she took it a little bit too far. And while she was diving one time, she decided that she actually didn't want one patch. She wanted to try to pop out both of her eyeballs. And so while she was scuba diving, she neglected to clear her mask and almost popped out both of her eyeballs. So we're gonna have to work on our pirate spirit. We're gonna turn it from 11 maybe down to an 8. Now, despite my best efforts, she actually was able to get into a PhD program. I told her new advisor that she was horrible and that she should just stay here, but she's moving on to, oops, Montana State. Wrong one. But there's Grizzlies up there. And with broken, let's give it up for Hayley.
That's a lot of slides.
They build, don't worry. Okay.
You've got all afternoon, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for coming to my master's defense today. This is the culmination of what's hard to believe these last 2.5 years of my life, but I am very happy to be presenting it today. Global drought is something that persists in areas both in rainforests as well as semi-arid and arid regions such as the desert. Here is global drought as of 2017, with red areas representing regions that were in a drought period, and areas of no color representing regions that were not in a drought period. Regional drought is defined as a time when precipitation in an area is less than the average for that specific region for a period of time. And droughts can occur seasonally, which are usually alleviated by precipitation either from winter snow or summer or spring rain. But droughts can also be multi-year, lasting many years or decades. It's important that we understand drought, both the seasonal and multi-year effects for our terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, especially now in an anthropogenic time in which humans can exacerbate drought up to 500% in some cases. This is a problem for some of our aquatic ecosystems because drought is rarely alleviated over one season, and droughts are projected to increase in both frequency and duration under future climate change scenarios. This is important for the Intermountain West in particular because the Intermountain West is projected to become drought prone as well. For example, the state of Utah, which is in the Intermountain West, in the past 100 years has had 6 significant droughts according to the Palmer Drought Severity Index. The first 3 droughts occurred in a 75-year period, while the last 3 severe droughts occurred in a 25-year period. So we are already seeing drought increase in frequency within the state. It is important that we understand how this impacts aquatic ecosystems, especially in the arid or semi-arid climate of Utah. The influence of drought of lake ecosystems largely causes drought-driven water loss. And this can cause changes in limnological characteristics, such as increases in temperature, changes in salinity, or decreased dissolved oxygen. And these changes usually cause acute changes to fish populations, such as fish kills. However, there are more long-term changes in drought-driven water loss that cause decreased water volume, which contributes to habitat loss. In the past, the focus for drought-driven habitat decline has been largely understudied. So I will be focusing on this today, and this is what I focused for on the thesis. Drought-driven habitat loss in Utah is similar to the rest of the Intermountain West in that we are competing for water use along with humans. So not only do we need to keep water in systems for our ecological benefits or the aquatic ecosystems, but we also need to balance it with human water use, usually for agricultural reasons. Having a cold here. In Utah, it's important that we look at systems that are not only managed by humans, but also managed for their ecological value. An example of a system that is managed both for human as well as ecological use is Bear Lake. Bear Lake is a large lake which is in northern Utah and southern Idaho. And I want to focus on the northern portion of the lake for this example. In 2010, a year that was not included within the 6 significant droughts, we can see that the water level is completely inundated the shoreline and the tributaries of the lake are completely connected. However, in 2003, a year that was impacted by drought, we can see that not only has the lake level declined and the shorelines are now exposed, but it's possible that the tributaries are no longer even connected to the lake. I want to be focusing today on the ecosystem of Bear Lake and what has occurred in this ecosystem due to drought-driven water loss. Bear Lake is a large oligotrophic lake which straddles the border between Utah and Idaho. It is recognized as a blue ribbon fishery within the state and is home to both the non-native lake trout as well as the native Bear Lake strain of the Bonneville cutthroat trout. The lake is a natural feature on the landscape, but in the early 1900s, a canal and pump station were erected on the northern region of the lake. So the lake is now managed as a reservoir for late season agricultural water storage. Because the lake is managed as a reservoir, average daily lake elevations are taken each day in order to monitor the lake elevations over time. And because of this, we have a robust historical record of those average daily lake elevations over the past 100 years. Here I have the year on the x-axis and the lake level in meters above sea level on the y-axis. And we can see from this statistically smooth trend line that over the past 100 years, the lake levels have fluctuated. When we compare those to the 6 significant droughts in Utah represented by the Great Polygons, we see that the greatest declines have occurred during those drought periods, with the greatest decline occurring between 1925 and 1940, where we saw a 6.6 meter decline in the lake elevation below the full pool capacity of Bear Lake. We saw a similar decline in the drought between 2000 and 2005, where the lake level declined 6.3 meters. But now I want to show you the average daily lake elevations and compare those to Bear Lake's full capacity, which is represented by the red line. If we look more closely, over the past 100 years, there have been only 6 instances when the lake level actually reaches the full pool or the full capacity. So this is showing us that not only are the lake level fluctuations due to drought, but also how humans are using the lake as a reservoir. And I want to show you once again some satellite images of how this can manifest within the littoral zones as well as the tributaries of the lake. This is St. Charles Creek, which is one of the main spawning tributaries of Bear Lake. In 2012, a non-drought year. And I've highlighted the tributary channel here and stopped this line when the tributary actually reaches the lake. We can see that the tributary is completely inundated by water and the channel is fully covered in water. However, in 2003, a year that was impacted by drought, not only is the tributary channel extended, but it no longer even connects to the lake. A similar story exists on the littoral zones or the shoreline areas of Bear Lake. In 2011, a period of non-drought, the eastern shore is completely inundated by water. However, in 2004, a drought year, we see nearly 100 meters of the shoreline is now exposed and unable to be used by aquatic organisms. This is important within Bear Lake because when the tributary channels become extended, they may not be able to be used for spawning migrations or juvenile migrations for the fishes of Bear Lake. Similarly, when the littoral substrate becomes stranded, it's no longer able to be used for refuge, spawning habitat, or as a food source for fishes of Bear Lake. We know that drought, as well as human water use, have caused lake level fluctuations over the past 100 years. And when lake levels are high, the tributaries and littoral zones are completely connected to the lake. However, when lake levels are low, the tributary channels become extended or may be completely disconnected. And similarly, the littoral zones are no longer able to be used by the aquatic species. This is important for many of the species of Bear Lake, but specifically two of the fishes I'm going to be focusing on today: the Bear Lake strain of the vaudeville cutthroat trout and the Bear Lake sculpin. Both of these fish rely on hydrologic connectivity in order to complete their life cycle. And I focus on each of these species in a separate chapter of my thesis. So I first want to focus on the Bear Lake sculpin. The Bear Lake sculpin is an endemic species of concern within the state of Utah. Endemic means that it is only found in Bear Lake. It is a profundal, benthic species, which means this fish spends most of its time on the bottom of the lake outside of the normal range of lake penetration. And it's also one of the main prey fish for the sport fishing. The Bear Lake sculpin has a unique life cycle in that it spends most of its time on the bottom of the lake. However, it migrates to the littoral cobble areas of the lake in order to deposit its eggs in these cobble areas. Once the eggs hatch, the larvae then seek refuge in the cobble areas in order to evade predators and grow into juveniles, which then return to the profundal areas of the lake in order to complete their life cycle. The Bear Lake sculpin is highly reliant on littoral cobble in order to complete their life cycle and keep the population abundant. We know that the Bear Lake sculpin needs littoral cobble for their spawning migrations or spawning habitat as adults, as well as refuge as juveniles or larvae. And when the lake levels are high, they're able to use the maximum amount of cobble available for these two life history needs. However, when lake levels decline, we do not know what happens to the amount of habitat available and what happens to the Bear Lake sculpin population as a result. And this brings me to the goal of my first chapter, which was to test whether a relationship exists between drought-driven lake level fluctuations and cobble availability and the Bear Lake sculpin population. And in order to accomplish this goal, I had three main study objectives. The first was to quantify the cobble area available to fishes at varying lake levels. The second was to test whether cobble availability impacts sculpin abundance. And the third was to test whether cobble availability impacts sculpin year class strength. So I want to first go over the methods I used to quantify cobble area. I used a combination of terrestrial and aquatic survey habitat techniques in order to map the littoral substrate of Bear Lake. I used terrestrial surveys, including RTK, or real-time kinematics, in order to map the exposed shorelines of Bear Lake. We used an RTK because this is basically a high-powered GPS that allows precise measurements of elevation of up to a centimeter. We also used hydroacoustic surveys to map the submerged littoral cobble around Bear Lake, as well as truthing those surveys with scuba diving when I wanted to become a pirate. In total, we were able to survey 7,100 hectares of Bear Lake. Here, the areas in which we surveyed are in purple, and the areas not surveyed are in gray. We surveyed from the full pool elevation to 12 meters below full pool. And it's important to point out that this is 6 meters below the historical low of Bear Lake. So we are capturing the amount of cobble that these fishes may have been exposed to historically. In total, we found that there were 38 hectares of cobble within Bear Lake from full pool to 12 meters below full pool. So what I did was I created a habitat map here with sand, cobble, gravel, a gravel sand mix, as well as bedrock, and the areas not surveyed in gray. And I defined the different substrate sizes according to Wentworth 1992. We can see that much of the littoral habitat is comprised of sand. However, there are concentrations on the eastern shore where we have other substrate types, including cobble. I then created a DEM, or an elevation map, which is of higher resolution and precision than the one currently available from the USGS to the public, and overlaid the habitat map on the elevation map in order to create an elevation-specific habitat map. Using this, I could extract elevation values to the specific habitat types in order to quantify the total cobble of area available from the deepest point in which we surveyed to full pool by centimeter. And what we see is what I'm going to show you here, with lake elevation in meters above sea level on the x-axis and the percentage of total cobble available at full pool on the y-axis. And we saw that as lake elevation declines, the total percentage of cobble available declines as well. It's important to point out that Bear Lake is an extremely large lake. It's 25,200 hectares in area. The total area of cobble that we were able to quantify is 38 hectares, which is less than 1% of the total area of Bear Lake. So there's a very small amount of cobble available at full pool, and this amount only declines as lake level declines. For example, with only a 1 meter decline below full pool, we see a 20% decrease in the amount of cobble. With a decrease in 5 meters below full pool, which is the average decline during drought periods, we see only 10% of the total cobble area available. And at the historical low, there was only 3% of the total cobble available for the fishes of Bear Lake. So we did see that there was a relationship between cobble availability and lake level. So now I want to see how that manifests in the sculpin population, which brings me to my second objective, which is to test whether cobble availability impacts sculpin abundance. In order to do this, I used data collected by the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, or the UDWR, as well as my own trawling events. There were 17 years of data included in this data set spanning 1990 to 2012, including trawling events in 2016 and 2017. Here I have the years for which we have data on the x-axis and the lake level on the y-axis. And what I want to show you with this graph is that we are encompassing periods of both non-drought when lake elevations were high, as well as drought periods when lake elevations were low with this data set. There are 15 separate trawling locations, as well as 9 different trawling depths within our data set. And what I'm hoping to do with this analysis is to determine population level influence of cobble habitat during specific years. So my question is, does a relationship exist between the availability of cobble habitat and the number of sculpin caught per hour of trawling? And in order to answer this question, I used a linear mixed model. My linear mixed model defines the catch per unit effort, or CPUE, as a function of the cobble area available during the summer trawling season, the trawling depth, as well as the interaction of those two effects. I included the interaction because I am assuming as the cobble area fluctuates, the most effective trawling depth for catching sculpin will fluctuate as well. This is a linear mixed model, so I included the random effects of year and location in order to take into account any sampling of bias associated with the trawling events. So here I'm going to be showing you the average summer cobble available on the x-axis and the catch per unit effort on the y-axis. This is model results for the median trawling depth with the black line representing the median prediction and the gray polygon representing plus or minus 1 standard error. What we see is that as average cobble available increases, there is a positive trend with the catch per unit effort of the sculpin. So we are seeing a response as cobble availability increases with the sculpin population. So now I want to move on to my third objective, which was to test whether cobble availability impacts sculpin year class strength. Similarly to my abundance analysis, I used both Utah Division of Wildlife Resources trawling events, as well as my own trawling events. And from those events, we had total lengths and weights from some of these sculpin captured. I then used a like-fit age relationship, which was established by Rizicki et al., and assigned ages according to the lengths of the sculpin that we caught. For example, with total length on the x-axis and the number captured on the y, we assigned ages including young of year or age 0, age 1, age 2, age 3, and age 4 to these sculpin. And with this analysis, I'm hoping to determine a population level influence of cobble habitat at age-specific periods. So my question for this analysis is, does the availability of cobble habitat influence sculpin year class strength? And in order to answer this question, I used a zero-inflated negative binomial mixed model. And what this means and why I use this analysis is that because we need to take into account the times that we catch sculpin of a specific age as well as times we do not catch sculpin of a specific age. So here are the number of sculpin in a trawling event on the x-axis and the frequency on the y-axis. We need to take into account each specific age captured in a trawling event. So for age 0 fish, for example, there are some trawls where we may not catch any age 0 fish and others where we may. Similarly, for age 1, we would expect the same result. Some of the trawling events we may not catch any age 1 fish, while sometimes we do. This same pattern is seen for age 2, age 3, and age 4 fish. So we end up with a zero-inflated negative binomial distribution, which is why I use that for this analysis. The zero-inflated negative binomial model has both a zero component, a logistic model, which determines whether or not we caught fish of a specific age, as well as a count component, which was the negative binomial distribution. And for the essence of time today, I'm only going to be talking about the count component of this model. I defined sculpin count as a function of fish age, the spawning cobble available, as well as the random effect of depth, with an offset of the number of trawls in a year. I'm assuming that fish age will be a high determinant of whether or not we catch a fish, because younger sculpin in the population are more abundant and therefore are more likely to be caught, while older fish are less abundant in the population and less likely to be caught. I included the offset variable of number of trawls in a year in order to take into account the effort put in each year within trawling events. What we would expect to see is with spawning cobble submerged on the x-axis and the sculpin year class strength on the y, as spawning cobble submerged increases, we would expect to see a strong year class strength or an increase in year class strength. So now I want to show you what this would look like in a time series. For example, a fish with the year hatched on the x-axis and the spawning cobble available on the y-axis. Year class strength. So what we would hypothesize our catch per unit effort, for example, age 0 sculpin, is that cobble availability increases, the catch per unit effort increases in suit. So what did we see from our model results? We saw just that. As the cobble availability increases, the catch per unit effort increases for the sculpin. It's important to not only look at the catch per unit effort for the individual ages, but also compare the ages over time during non-drought and drought periods. So here I have the age on the x-axis and the mean predicted catch per unit effort on the y-axis. And what we would hypothesize to see for a healthy population during a non-drought period is that the catch per unit effort for younger age 0 fish is highest because they're a larger proportion in the population. and ages 3 and 4, which are a smaller proportion of the population, we catch less often. So I want to show you the model results for non-drought conditions in which we modeled the 95th percentile of cobble available, and drought conditions where we modeled the 5th percentile of cobble available. And what we see is that during non-drought conditions, we have a cascading effort of a healthy population. The age 0 sculpin that are abundant within the population are caught most frequently, while the age 3 and 4 that are a smaller proportion of the population are caught less frequently. But what we really want to focus on is the differences between non-drought and drought periods. So here, the drought period in orange, we can see that there is a decline in the catch per unit effort for both age 0, age 1, and age 2 sculpin. And it's important that we monitor this and see these changes during drought periods because the age 0 and age 1 sculpin are not mature. Therefore, these fishes are not contributing to the population during spawning events. In summary, for my first chapter, I'd like to bring you back to my objectives. The first was to quantify the cobble area available to fishes at varying lake levels. And I was able to do that, and we saw that as lake level declines, the cobble available declines as well. There's an average of an 85% decline in cobble available during the drought period. My second objective was to determine if cobble availability impacts sculpin abundance. And we saw that there was a trend that as cobble availability decreases, sculpin abundance decreases. And finally, my third objective was to determine if cobble availability impacts sculpin year class strength. And I saw that as cobble availability decreases, year class strength decreases as well. And we have the greatest influence on the young and year sculpin. The implications for my first chapter and for the Bear Lake sculpin include that the Bear Lake sculpin are a short-lived profundal species. They only live to 4 years old, and they are a species that spend most of their time outside of the normal light penetration. They spend only a fraction of their life in littoral cobble, either for spawning or for refuge. However, we are seeing these responses in the population with abundance as well as year class strength. And intensified droughts of longer duration could cause population collapse or extinction of the species since the fish is only found in. So I did see that there was a relationship between drought-driven habitat loss and a forage fish such as the Bear Lake sculpin. But now I want to focus on an apex predator, the Bear Lake strain of Bonneville cutthroat trout. Remember, we know that drought as well as human water use cause lake level fluctuations. And these lake level fluctuations in Bear Lake, when lake levels are high, the tributaries are completely connected to the lake. However, when lake levels decline, the tributary channels are extended and may not even be connected to the lake at all. This is important for species such as the Bonneville cutthroat trout. The Bonneville cutthroat trout in Bear Lake is recognized as its own strain. It is the broodstock source for many other Bonneville cutthroat trout populations within the state. It is one of the main sport fishes of Bear Lake, so it's important economically as well as ecologically. And it's also the only natural adfluvial population of Bonneville cutthroat trout. The Bonneville cutthroat trout are adfluvial, which means that they run from the lakes into the tributaries in order to spawn, similarly to how a salmon runs from the ocean to the river. Adult Bear Lake Bonneville cutthroat trout spend most of their time in the lake, but during their spawning events, they run to the tributaries such as St. Charles Creek in order to deposit their eggs. They remain in the tributary as larvae and grow until they are able to return to the lake as juveniles and complete their life cycle as adults. The Bear Lake strain of the Bonneville cutthroat trout needs hydrologic connectivity in order to complete its life cycle. We know that the Bear Lake strain of the Bonneville cutthroat trout needs tributary connection for both their spawning migrations as adults, as well as their juvenile migrations from the tributaries back into the lake. And when lake levels are high, the tributaries are completely connected. However, when lake levels are low, the tributary channels may become extended or completely disconnected from the lake. And migration is not only energetically costly, but there have also been anecdotal accounts of pelicans lining the tributaries of Bear Lake during periods of drought and essentially predating on these fish that have nowhere to hide because there is no water. So the goal of my second chapter is to determine if a relationship exists between drought-driven lake level fluctuations and tributary connectivity and the bottom-bill cutthroat trout. And in order to do this, I'm going to be talking about two of my study objectives today in the essence of time, which the first was to quantify tributary channel distance at varying lake levels, and the second was to test whether bottom-bill cutthroat trout ear class strength changes with tributary channel connectivity. So I'll first go over the methods I used to quantify channel distance. I mapped spawning tributaries using Google satellite images and created a tributary map. I then used the elevation map, or the DEM, that I created with the RTK and hydroacoustic surveys, and was able to overlay the tributary map on the elevation map in order to extract elevation values. Using that, I could then quantify the channel distance that the fish would be exposed to from the lowest historical lake level to full pool. Now I want to show you the results from that analysis. Here I have lake level relative to full pool in meters on the x-axis, with 0 being full pool, and the tributary channel distance on the y-axis. There are 4 main spawning tributaries of Bear Lake: Swan Creek, Fish Haven Creek, St. Charles Creek, and Big Spring Creek. And all of these tributaries have differences in size and capacity for spawning bottom-bill cutthroat trout. St. Charles Creek is the largest creek of Bear Lake and has potentially the largest capacity for spawning cutthroat. So what we see is that as lake level declines, the tributary channel distance increases for all of these tributaries. However, they have a different magnitude depending on where they are on the shoreline. For example, Swan Creek and Fish Haven Creek have a gradual shoreline, so their relationship as lake level declines is more gradual than those tributaries with a steep shoreline, such as St. Charles Creek and Big Spring Creek. It's important to point out as well that at the lowest historical lake level, which is represented by this black line, the tributaries were completely disconnected from the lake overall. So this could have potential implications for the Bear Lake cutthroat population. So my second study objective was to test whether bottom-bill cutthroat trout ear class strength changes tributary channel connectivity. In order to do this, I used a gill netting dataset provided by the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. There were 12 years of data within this dataset, spanning 1997 to 2015. Therefore, there were 18 different year classes of fish spanning 1986 to 2014. There were 4 separate locations. With this analysis, I'm hoping to determine population level influences of tributary channel distance and drought at each specific period. So my question for this analysis is, does a change in tributary channel distance influence cutthroat ear class strength? And in order to answer this question, I once again used a zero-inflated negative binomial model. Just to reiterate, with the number of cutthroat captured on the x-axis and the frequency on the y, we have to take into account periods where we catch fish as well as do not catch fish of a specific age, which leads us to a zero-inflated negative binomial distribution. This zero-inflated negative binomial model has both a zero component, or a logistic model, as well as a count component, which takes into account the negative binomial distribution. But in the essence of time, I'm only going to be focusing on the count component of this model. Here I defined the trout count as a function of the fish's age, the tributary channel distance that it would be exposed to during the spawning season, the random effect of depth, and the random effect of location, and used an offset variable including the number of gill nets set in the year in order to take into account effort. So what we would expect to see with tributary channel distance on the x and cutthroat ear class strength on the y is that as tributary channel distance increases, the cutthroat ear class strength decreases. Remember, it's not only energetically costly for these fishes to be migrating, but they may have higher levels of predation by pelicans when tributary channels are extended and lake levels are low. So now I want to show you what this would look like in a time series. Here I have the year that the fish would hatch on the x-axis and the tributary channel distance on the y-axis. which will be represented by the gray dashed line. And over this period of time, we do see periods when the tributary channel distance is low, as well as when it is high or possibly disconnected from the lake. Now I want to show you what we would expect for catch per unit effort, for example, for age 1 fish. Remember, as tributary channel distance increases, we would expect to see a decrease of their year class strength. What we would hypothesize to see is the exact inverse of the tributary channel distance, and that when tributary channel distance is low, catch per unit effort is high. When tributary channel distance is high, catch per unit effort is low. So what we saw for model results was almost exactly that, the exact opposite. As the tributary channel distance is low, catch per unit effort is high. But it's also important to look at this across different ages of the cutthroat. Here I have age on the x-axis and the mean predicted catch per unit effort on the y-axis. Drought conditions are represented by the red square, and this would be the maximum distance fish would be exposed to. And non-drought conditions are represented by the blue diamond, which is the minimum distance that the fish would be exposed to. What we would expect to see for a healthy population is that fishes of younger ages that may not fully be recruited to the year would have a lower catch per unit effort. We would find some equilibrium in that the fishes are a high proportion within the population as well as recruited to the gear. And those fishes that are older and a smaller proportion of the population would have a lower catch per unit effort. So what we saw with non-drought conditions and our model output is that those fishes that are ages 5 and 6 are fully recruited to the gear and high abundance in the population. What we really want to look at is the comparison between drought conditions and non-drought conditions. So what we see for non-drought conditions, or when the fishes would be highly exposed to tributary channel distances, we see a decrease in catch per unit effort for ages 1 to ages 6. And we're seeing a decrease in the ages that are not only not mature, but also ones that are mature and can contribute to the population during spawning events. In summary, I was able to quantify the tributary channel distance at varying lake levels. I saw that as lake level decreases, tributary channel distance increases, and sometimes the distance can increase up to 4-fold, for example, in St. Charles Creek. My second objective was to test whether channel distance influences year class strength. And I did see that as channel distance increases, year class strength decreases. And this is a population level response that's possibly driven by both drought and competition. The implications for the Bonneville cutthroat trout is that they migrate at multiple times within their life cycle, not only as adults, but also as juveniles. We did see that there was a population level effect of year class strength. So there is a disturbance between the spawning migrations or the juvenile migrations, which we are seeing in lower year class strength during drought periods. It could be possible that drought is a natural cull, which is why we see this increase in the older ages being caught during drought periods. And what I mean by this is during non-drought conditions, there may be many fishes that are able to enter the population and enter the lake. Competition may be high during those periods, therefore we see a smaller amount of older fish within the population. However, when competition is low during drought conditions, we may see a lower proportion of fish entering the population in the lake, causing competition to be low, and therefore a larger number of fish being caught during this gill netting event. In conclusion, we know that drought and human water use cause lake level fluctuations. Lake level fluctuations impact the cobble available to fishes as well as tributary channel distance. We know that drought influences year class strength for both the Bear Lake Sculpin as well as the Bonneville cutthroat trout. So we are seeing a population level response in terms of drought for the Bear Lake Sculpin and the Bonneville cutthroat trout. The larger implications for this study include that the Bear Lake Sculpin and the Bonneville cutthroat trout are one of many species in the West that have evolved in the drought-influenced Great Basin. We know that historically, and in prehistoric times, due to dendrochronology, that there have been droughts and multi-year droughts within this region. However, they did not evolve in the projected drought cycle that we expect due to climate change. They did also not evolve in the Great Basin with increased consumptive use by humans. And additionally, they did not evolve with invasive species that are now prevalent within Bear Lake. Increases in drought, increased consumptive use, as well as invasive species may act synergistically to impact the population. I've studied that climate change, drought, and lake level decline can impact habitat available to fishes. And this has been done in the past. However, there is still a call to fulfill the need for research that links habitat and fishes in the future due to climate change. I mentioned before that there have been studies that focus on drought-driven lake level decline and habitat, such as Jeremy's study. However, this study is the first at this scale. Jeremy's study focused on an 18-hectare lake, while mine I was able to quantify both habitat as well as bathymetry in a 25,200 hectare lake. And this is important for lakes and reservoirs in the west that are larger than those in the east or the Midwest. This study provides a template and a framework in order to determine the magnitude of drought-driven lake level decline on habitat as well as fishes. If you're able to survey a lake and create a DEM, you can see the changes in habitat as well as the fish species. I empirically demonstrated that drought-driven habitat loss influences fish species regardless of their trophic position. Not only did I look at an apex predator such as the Bear Lake bottom-bill cutthroat trout, but also a forage fish such as the Bear Lake smoltman. And it's also important to point out that these fishes only spend a fraction of their life cycle in the areas that are most impacted by drought. So it is important that we study fishes not only that spend a large amount of time in tributaries or littoral zones, but also those fishes that are required to have these areas in order to complete their life cycle. And with that, I would like to thank my committee members, Mary Connor and Nick Bowers, the Fish Ecology Lab, and the USGS in kind, including Phaedra Reedy and Gary Feedy, the UDWR, including Scott Tolentino, who's provided countless hours of me emailing him, spending time with him in the field, as well as most of the historical data sets that I have, Paul Thompson, the Ecology Center, the Idaho Fish and Game, including David Tusher and Artie Brimmer, and of course the Lake Ecology Lab with our new logo, including Kevin Landum, Brad Guy Dillingham, Jenna Keaton, Jamie Reynolds, Tyler Arnold, and Chuck Carpenter. And of course, I have to thank Jeremy. So on Halloween, I printed out Jeremy's face. I was also lecturing for the class, and so that was the scariest costume any of the kids have probably ever seen. We also know that Jeremy is, he's a great sport, right? He's a great sport. But, we've also failed to see him at a lot of the Watts sporting events. So I took the liberty of adding him into some of the pictures here. We can see that he played football in fall of 2015. And he also played last year. I don't know if you guys missed him, but here he is in his puppy. So I've spent the last 2.5 years with Jeremy, and I think he knows that I've grown a lot. And he's a good sport. I'm able to make fun of them, but when it comes down to it, Jeremy is a really wonderful person. Not to get into it too much, but I was extremely sick last year to the point where I couldn't walk. And Jeremy is part of the reason why I'm still here today and able to present. He was, incredibly patient with me and has really mentored me through this. And hopefully we'll continue to have a good working relationship in the future once I go to Montana State University. I would also like to thank Gary. Gary is one of the first people that you are put in contact with when you come here at Utah State University. You're in the fish field. And Gary is also known as Gare Bear. So thank you, Gary. I also want to thank our technicians, which I say they're always the best in the business. Here we have 2 of my technicians acting possibly like the Blues Brothers. Hunter has been my technician for 2 years in a row. He had the pleasure of dealing with me for 2 field seasons, and they were also very good sports, including my technician Tim. Matt Meyer who went around Bear Lake with me and surveyed those 7,100 hectares of the lake. We spent many, many hours out there, and he actually didn't go crazy and probably kept me safe. And then also Chuck Carpenter, who's also awesome to have around. And of course, all my friends that I've made in Logan. I hope you all come to Bozeman. I will miss you. And my parents, who have come here not only to nurse me back from health, but are also once again here all the way from Georgia to watch me present today, where hopefully I will become a master in a few hours. And with that, I'll take any questions.
So, is the sculpin cobble habitat depth limited? In other words, when you have full pool, are they using all of the cobble or only that down to a certain depth?
Yeah, so that's a great question. They only spawn in the cobble from 0.5 meter to 3 meters in depth. However, I'm not sure how they use the cobble as refuge, but it does appear that at least for the spawning events, when cobble availability decreases, we are seeing a decrease in air class strength. So it may not be possible that during rearing conditions, they're only using that limited amount, but during spawning conditions.
But that would change how much cobble is available when you do your statistics if you only use that depth.
So I am using the maximum amount of cobble available during my statistical analyses. I haven't limited to the band which they actually use for spawning. So it's what's the word?
There's more to do.
There's more to do, yeah.
I simply note that the cobble managing agency was to see this presentation, they could theoretically argue the entity to maximize the amount of existing cobble that's covered by water, or create more cobble at deeper depths for them to use in the water years. I would assume that that second one would probably be a good way to go forward, but is there a good reason to assume that?
Yeah, I mean, Bear Lake is extremely large, right? And even though there's 38 hectares of cobble, that's a lot of cobble, right? There are areas within Bear Lake where they have put in cobble-like structures, and that's kind of on the western shore, but that's more to aggregate fish within an area for fishing. And actually, in previous studies that have focused on smaller lakes and coarse woody habitat, they found that when you add habitat at deeper depths, you don't really see a population level response. So it would be a lot more feasible, especially in a lake like Bear Lake that is managed as a reservoir, to manage the lake levels during the periods when the fish is even most, rather than adding in a bunch more habitat. And also you can kind of kill two birds with one stone if you manage those lake levels, because the spawning migrations for the Bear Lake strain of Flamingo cutthroat trout, as well as the times when the Bear Lake sculpin are spawning, they have an overlapping period.
So your expectations and then modeled results of young sculpin CPUE tracked almost exactly with lake level. Do you have any idea what the mechanism of that would be? Are the sculpins spawning only when the conditions are good, or are more of them being eaten in years when they don't have the refuge?
Yeah, so I can't say definitively whether it's due to increases in predation or decreases in spawning, but the analysis that I did incorporated the cobble habitat available, not the lake level fluctuations. So I am using cobble within that model. So they are following the amount of cobble available. However, in other studies that focus on sculpin and cobble and habitat availability, when species of sculpin do not have the optimum habitat available, they may just refuse to spawn outright. So I can't specifically say whether it's due to them not spawning or due to the habitat not being optimal, or whether it's due to refuge or predation.
When it's the on the different time of year for the cats, obviously it's spring.
Yeah, so the sculpin spawn even a little bit earlier spring. So from April to June, obviously that depends on temperature. But so they could have a portion that overlaps. And that would depend from year to year on conditions, but it'd be possible to manage.
So Bailey, good job. But I have a question for you on your sculpin graphs. Did you use the year on those graphs when the drought occurred, or did you offset those a year to account for the sculpin spawning 1 year and then actually catching each one versus the following?
No, so I back calculated the year class of the fish. So if you caught a fish in 2014 and it was 4 years old, I use the spawning cobble available in the year that it would hatch in order to inform my model.
That's the question.
Yeah, Jack. The Jack question.
First off, great job.
Thank you.
For the presentation. So the one thing I'm missing here, in terms of reservoir operations, is the view that the fact that Bear Lake is operated as a reservoir makes the droughts longer, makes the highs higher, makes the lows lower, changes the annual variability? When you use the word drought, you imply nature. When we look at reservoirs, it's a whole different field. So, and then I got one other question, but just talk to me a little bit about whether reservoir operations make it different than if this were just a lake and nature was giving us.
Yeah, so I don't know for sure, and that's something that I wanted to tease out initially, but wasn't able to get my hands on the data of how much water they put into the lake and how much water they take out of the lake, and how that's actually changing the lake elevations. I wasn't able to get my hands on that, but you're absolutely correct, right? Both of those things, not only the droughts within the area, but also human water use could be causing these fluctuations. So we do see that there's a correlation between drought and the lake level declines, but how much the lake level declines, we do not know precisely whether that's due to drought or human water use.
So that's one thing that needs to be looked at. And the other one is you are assuming that the boundary between gravel and sand is fixed. Whereas I think most of us would think that the sand is just mantling gravel, and somebody, unless you know this, I mean, the sand gravel contact might be the orbital depth of waves. It might be more sand due to human settlement. If the lake is perpetually lower, that might remobilize the sand and shift it to lower elevations. I think that we need to be careful about asserting or implying that that is a fixed boundary unless there have been other studies which demonstrate that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, fortunately for the sculpin, the cobble is what they spawn on. So I did map the areas of littoral gravel and littoral sand, but specifically for my biological questions, I was only focused on cobble. And around Bear Lake, and this is a specific case, the cobbles are very well defined and very different than the gravel.
So you're saying it doesn't matter. I mean, the way I'm thinking about all your data is that the sand would shift and uncover more cobble. I mean, there's more cobble underneath the sand. I mean, the whole damn lake is probably underlain by cobble. So, do you know that, or I just don't get that?
Yes. So I understand what your question is now. When we did the surveys, this was cobble that I could physically see, and when we did the scuba diving surveys, something I would press my hands into the sand, and if I wasn't feeling something hard that I could uncover, then I said it was sand. That doesn't mean, like you're saying, that as the lake level declines and the wave action happens, this could uncover better substrate. But from the areas that I've quantified, which was 12 meters below full pool, I am pretty confident in saying that that is for sure cobble, unless the cobble is, covered by feet of sand. Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Hayley, the USGS did some subsurface mapping. There's very little rock below the surface. So I realized what he was asking about the line moving down, but we've been in extended droughts long enough at Bear Lake, especially at the low levels where the cobble doesn't, or more cobble doesn't become exposed, neither does gravel for that matter. It does fluctuate in that zone a little bit, but once the lake hits that low point and it sits there, you don't see any additional habitat being developed. The only spot I've seen that happen is at the mouth of Swan Creek where it cuts down and there's a little bit of gravel, but you would expect that at the mouth of a tributary or something. But along the east side of the lake, there's very little habitat that's being uncovered by lower lake levels and shifting the city.
Join me in A, thanking Jack for epic questions, and B, congratulating Hayley on her accomplishments. All right, and it's the it's gonna be the only house in Logan with Wisconsin Badger flag hanging outside of it. So I'll see you guys tonight at 7. Still, Kevin. Where's Kevin? Kevin.
Quiet.
This is the beneficiary. You don't get paid unless you're writing your check.
Yeah.
No, green
Yeah, I mean, we can see.
So those schools that we see, that's you like sand? Or is it?
Yeah, sorry. For sure, 2 fish, maybe 3 fish. All the ground. But there's for sure 2. For sure 2. Let's say you have 1 H2 so it looks like you just and then there's definitely the opposite where you have more of the trees right here, all the H2s right here. So that one So maybe that could be it. Is it so what the hell is